Hi, this is Carrie Brownstein.
This is DJ Premier.
This is Darren Aronofsky.
You got the RZA right here.
Rose McGowan.
Radiohead.
Aisha Tyler.
Tribe Called Quest.
Fred Armisen.
Fritz Paul.
Javier Munoz. Seth Meyers.
Frankie Cosmos.
Flying Lotus.
Hi, we're Chaim, and you're listening to the Talkhouse Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Talkhouse Podcast. I'm Josh Modell. This week, we've paired up a couple of old friends and one-time tour mates, Sharon Van Etten and Jonathan Meiburg. This pairing was especially fun for me since I had the pleasure of putting these two together in a different context many years ago when I was editor of the AV Club. Sharon and Jonathan performed an amazing version of the Tom Petty-Stevie Nicks duet Stop Dragging My Heart Around for the site's AV Undercover series. Seeing their faces together on this Zoom brought back that fun memory, and it was great seeing them reconnect. Van Etten is a singer and songwriter who's been making records for the past decade plus, growing and changing and taking chances in exactly the way you hope truly talented people will. Her amazing early records were quietly intense, very confessional affairs, but she burst from the seams with subsequent releases. In 2019, she released Remind Me Tomorrow, which brought in bigger sounds and colors and an entirely different kind of confidence to her songwriting and performance. She gives partial credit in this chat to producer John Congleton, who was recommended to Van Etten by none other than Jonathan Meiburg. Earlier this year, Van Etten released another incredible album called We've Been Going About This All Wrong, which puts into intense songs some of the feelings we've all been feeling the past couple of years. You know what I'm talking about. Check out a little bit of Mistakes from that new album, and check out Van Etten on the Wild Hearts tour over the next few months with Angel Olsen and Julian Baker. Today's other guest, Jonathan Meiburg, is best known in the music world as the driving force behind the band Shearwater, which he started way back in the late 90s as an offshoot of his previous band, Ockerville River. But under this name, Meiburg has created a vast and varied catalog that combines his writerly mind with sometimes moody, sometimes joyous music. Shearwater just released their first album in 6 years. It's called The Great Awakening, and it's what a lazy podcast host might refer to as a return to form, or at least more austere earlier vibes. Don't let that 6-year gap fool you, though. Meiburg has been plenty busy. He's got another band called Loma with the members of Cross Record, and they've got a third album on the way. Oh, and Meiburg wrote and released an incredible book called A Most Remarkable Creature, The Hidden Life and Epic Journey of the World's Smartest Birds of Prey, which rolls up history, science, and travel into one really beautifully written piece. As you'll hear in this conversation, he's already started working on another book, but for podcasting purposes, here's a little bit of a Shearwater song. This is Empty Orchestra from The Great Awakening. As you'll hear, Van Etten and Meiburg are old friends who toured together long ago but hadn't seen each other in person until very recently, when Van Etten's tour took her to Hamburg, where Meiburg is currently living. They talk about writing songs and specifically about how gibberish can become lyrics, which I always find fascinating. Meiburg remarks on Van Etten's transformation as a stage performer over the years, and they even chat about Sharon's son, specifically his relationship to the movie Cool Runnings. Enjoy.
How do you handle it when people come up to you and want an interaction of some kind?
And I guess it just depends on how you're approached, right? Usually before I can say anything, I get a little choked up personally.
Yeah.
You know, and the fact that anyone even can identify me, or spot me or whatever. It's still very surreal that it happens. Yeah. How about you?
I mean, it doesn't happen to me all that often. It's happened enough that I'm really glad it doesn't happen a lot. Because I think if it happened all the time, it would drive me fucking crazy.
Oh.
But on the one hand, it's wonderful if somebody wants to thank you for something that you made or something that meant something to them. I mean, that's the most precious thing. I mean, we're not in this for the money. So it's, that feeling that you've made something that connected with another person is priceless. On the other hand, though, also sometimes you have a feeling that the person you're talking to somehow wants something from you that you couldn't possibly ever give them.
When I think about celebrities and being followed around, and even when they're not followed around, whenever they meet someone new, I could imagine that being part of their insecurity whenever they meet someone that maybe they aren't in it all for the right reasons, and they second guess anyone that they meet. And I don't know, I think that would be, and I would never want to leave my house if that was the case.
Yeah, I imagine that someone like Paul McCartney basically lives in fancy house arrest.
I know, and then living around security cameras and gates and, you know, people having to vet people for you. I'm glad I'm not there.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't, whatever they pay, it doesn't seem worth it in a lot of ways.
I'm sure they're just at peace with, you know what, I think I have enough friends. I don't think I need to make any new ones.
Yeah, but at the same time, you're a public character. So your whole thing is about transmitting, but the receiver, you turn the receiver off after a while.
And like being present, right? Being present and being able to connect with people is a huge part of what we do, right? So
maybe having a really intimidating or frightening kind of persona is actually a really canny strategy.
Oh man, you don't make me want to pivot my career right now.
A long time ago, you told me that the name you wanted for your secret solo project.
Quiet bitch.
Yeah, I think of that all the time.
My dark, noisy electronica stuff.
Yeah.
I still save some demos under that title.
You think you'll actually ever use it?
I don't know, but I laugh every time, you know, when you just get in different headspaces of sonics, you know, and it's just like, okay, well, this is when I want to write piano stuff. This is when I want to write guitar stuff. And this is just like weird noise, but I think about it.
I mean, how do you know at this point, like because you're recording your own name, do you feel like that is you?
You know, it's funny. I kind of regret staying under my actual name because, you know, I feel if you have an artist name, it's easier to separate yourself a bit from it. And I'm just over some 13 years into a career. Can I just start a band name now that it kind of has changed from being solo to, you know, it's like solo, songwriter, you know, all those titles that get attached to anyone that sings and writes their own songs, and especially being a female. Yeah. But I don't know. I feel like it might morph into a different project eventually, because if I write something that doesn't feel somewhat autobiographical or have a really strong sense of melody or something, like I'll put it in a folder and just say, you know, there's something to this. I don't know what it's for. Maybe I'll give it to someone or someone can help me finish it or whatever. But hopefully eventually I can just have a band name or something.
I'm trying to think of instances now where this has ever happened, where somebody has a quote unquote solo career and then becomes a band. It seems like it always goes the other way.
I feel like as I've learned how to let go and collaborate with more people, and I'm learning how to have a touring band, I feel like I'll be leaning on my bandmates more in the studio earlier on than I had before. Yeah. I know I just feel like I've had somewhat of a backwards career, but I'm very curious how that would change my writing in the studio. I don't ever write in the studio.
You don't write in the studio? Like you have the songs before you go in?
Yes. I mean, do you tend to write in the studio?
That's an amorphous kind of thing. I mean, the Shearwater record that we just did was made at a studio, but it was in the house that was next door to where I was living in the trailer during the early days of the pandemic. So I was also making breakfast in there. So the line between what was the studio and what was the residence was pretty blurry.
But were you writing as a band, or did you go into the studio just you at first and then it became other musicians?
At this point, I mean, I haven't played with a band since 2018. That was such a long evolution from having a core band that was a fixed group of people to that eventually kind of starting to splinter and fly apart. And then I got new people that I worked with, and that felt really weird at first. But over time, I've started to really embrace the fact that, okay, for a tour, there's a group of musicians. For an album, there's a group of musicians. It doesn't have to be this like marriage You don't have to have this open-ended commitment for all time based mostly on passive aggression. And, especially I think as you get older, these things start to, you're not 22 years old anymore, and people have demands in their lives and their time that, don't make it possible for them to get in a van for 3 weeks or whatever. It seems like now there's just sort of a group of people that is there for one project, one album, one tour, and maybe some of them will come along to the next one, or maybe they'll take an exit ramp after that point. And it is fun to work with new people. But to answer your question, that I started with, it was me and Dan Dazinski, who's also my bandmate in Loma. I had a few little ideas for songs, but I didn't really know what we were tiptoeing into. And we started by making a whole bunch of really long instrumentals, like 45-minute instrumentals, just to explore sound for fun and not worry about songs yet.
When did you start writing and collaborating process on the record? And did you have subject matter in mind before the writing started?
No. For me, it comes from a feeling, like a wordless feeling first. And I try to make the music that evokes that feeling. Or I just start trying to make music and notice if I'm getting a feeling from it and then chase that. And then sometimes there'll be a phrase or two of the lyrics that's there from the beginning, but that doesn't usually solidify until the end. And I don't even really know sometimes what the songs are about until they're finished.
I do hope that I am able to let go in a space like that with other musicians, but I get very insecure when I'm playing, and if I'm singing stream of consciousness over a melody, but it usually starts with a feeling and a melody, and I'm playing until I have some type of form.
Yeah. And
like phrasing is usually there, and melody from verse to chorus or whatever you want to call it is there. But I tend to record stream of conscious for like 10, 15 minutes, and then I'll listen back to it and pull meaning from phrases or just phrases that I like and build around those. But it sounds pretty similar to what you do.
But yeah, I always feel like when you're singing nonsense, you never sing anything that sounds wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Like you'll never pick a word that like doesn't sing well. Your unconscious mind is a pretty good singer in that way, because when you just write the words out, sometimes you'll write out words and they'll be pretty good, but then once you try to sing them, it's just like, nope, this ain't working.
When you think of a voice as another instrument, it has its timing and syncopations that whenever I write things out, I try to tap it out to be like, no, it needs this many syllables, and like these are the emphases. Because even if it is nonsense, I know however it's articulated, even in the nonsense articulation, there's something to that.
Yeah, and sometimes I'll just write out what the nonsense seems to be, even if it's just complete gibberish. And then I'll keep that as part of the document and then keep referring back to it if I get stuck on something. And often a line that I'm like, that's not anything, will end up there because I just can't find anything that seems to sing better, or it seems to mean something by itself in some way. We did some takes actually on the record where I started doing scratches through the main vocal microphone that I used. And some of that stuff actually ended up in the final thing where I had no idea what was going to come out of my mouth. But what I did was I couldn't beat it.
I guess you're comfortable enough to do that with Dan. Have you done that before?
Not like that. That's quite special because Dan and I have now known and worked together for quite a while. Dan is so unselfconscious in himself that he really encourages that energy in you. And with Loma, it's like that too, which is me and Dan and Emily Cross. We're not afraid to do really embarrassing things in front of each other. Or mostly not afraid, not afraid enough that we actually, we do dumb things. And
that's a good friend.
Yeah, he's wonderful. He's a sweetheart. He's extremely talented and extremely humble, which is a funny combination. I didn't even know that he played drums really until we did the second Loma record. He let me play drums a lot on the first Loma record, which I am not a good drummer at all. And I was like, why did you let me do that? You were sitting there the whole time and you played rings around me. He's like, wow, it sounded fine.
Aw.
Now, I've heard you play drums though.
Very minimally. I like certain beats and I like syncopating them over multiple tracks. When I was making Are We There and Zeke, my drummer at the time, was playing drums, Zeke Hutchins. Mm-hmm. He would play drums, but everything that I anticipated was kind of the opposite. And so we played on that a little bit and would, offset each other's styles by having sometimes 2 or 3 drum tracks on a song. But that's around the time I was experimenting a little bit with drum machine programming. And so that kind of informs the way that I play. I can't drum very fast. I can't do very complicated beats, but they're usually counterintuitive for what a real drummer would play.
The fun of playing with other people is when they do things that you wouldn't do. And that does get sort of lost sometimes in the process, like I did on this last record, where a lot of it was just me and Dan. And then Emily Lee, who came in later on and was sort of, even though she didn't play all that much on it, she was very present kind of as a producer kind of character in the background when it was in the final stages of it. Just before the pandemic, we brought in the drummer to play for a couple of days. And then also like some horn players. But the strings were all done remotely. I never even met the person who did them.
That's so wild. Do you feel like with having to pace out recording and do things long distance, has it benefited the creative process? Or do you think it's just opened new avenues for you? Or did you find it difficult? Or both?
I think it made me more willing to mess with stuff that people sent, which is partly because they're not in the room there with you, so you don't feel like you're going to bother them. I mean, the strings, we only scored strings out for 4 or 5 of the songs in the Shearwater record, and then this engineer, Theo Caron, recorded them in L.A. They had one string player, Dina Maccabee, who just brought in a bunch of violins and violas, and she played everything. And then we got those tracks back. They sounded great, but then we started dropping them into other songs and then pitching them down or slowing them down. And we loved the way that they sounded. And so there are strings throughout the record, but really a lot of them are just repurposed from the third track. And at the end of the record, there's a string cue that's just all the strings that were recorded for the record all played at once together. And I don't know that I would have had the guts to do that if I'd actually had the quartet in there and recorded their parts. And it reminds you that these are just sounds we're making. You can do anything to them. There's nothing particularly sacred necessarily about a single performance.
Have you worked with string players a lot before?
Yeah, over the years. One thing I really love about string players, and it is a blast to actually be in the room with them. I mean, you've done this. They assume that listening to one another is like a precondition for making music, even if they don't like each other, which I feel like most bands, it takes forever to learn that, especially dudes, young dudes. It's like me.
Trying to be loud.
Turn my guitar up, turn my bass up, turn the drums up, turn it all up. And the string players are like, no, we have to blend and make this sound together. Even if you can tell that the viola player hates the cello player, it doesn't matter. They're just like, that's not how music works. Music is listening.
Right. Also, where they, it's a very clear role that you have. You have to kind of steer clear of certain. If you can't go in the cello, the cello is the cello, it stays in the low end, and the viola has to kind of stay in the mids, and the violin stays in the highs, and there's no misinterpreting where your part is or where your role is. Where I feel like in synth land can be tricky, like synth and bass, and even sometimes guitar with all the pedals that people have now. It's a lot more. It's up for debate when someone's in your sonic zone.
Yeah, who's got the low frequencies on this?
Yeah, so you have to define them more often, I think, when it's not a defined role.
I keep making recordings that are darker and darker and darker frequency. I just don't like high end that much. And the thing was, when you do that, especially for the backing track, and you really keep the high mids out of most things, then when you put the vocal on, it just soars over the thing because there's nothing in the way.
Absolutely.
It's really, really nice. And it also, stuff that's kind of dark but clear, you also just want to turn it up.
But also how I think a lot of people listen to music now, on these headphones that we're on, higher end is even more painful
yes.
because of the streaming world. And so I have a hard time, as I'm even making or mixing a record, I'm anticipating how people are listening to it too. I first make it how I want to make it, but then as you're fine tuning at the final stages, I think about how people listen to it and make sure that it's even all the high frequencies are a little softened or something.
Bless you. That's part of why your record sounds so good. But those frequencies just are they're not present in older recordings. I think it's like a set of options that became available starting in the 80s, really. And just because they're there doesn't mean you should automatically use them. You know?
Absolutely.
It is funny to think, though, when you're done with, you're mixing your record and you're listening to it on the monitors and everything, you think, okay, no one is ever going to hear this like this except me.
I hate even having to think in that way because, I try to make it, I'm sure you do, just as a listening experience, as a piece, right?
Yeah.
But you have to listen to, in all these other ways and find that middle ground without feeling like you're, what's the word?
Losing the life of the recording, losing the life of the song, the thing you liked about it.
Yes, exactly. As long as you're not killing it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And low end is especially tricky that way. Like it's you'll have some bass sounds that just sound gargantuan on some speakers, and then you put on another one and they're just gone. So it's like you end up having to layer things on top of them so that they'll read another. I mean, how do you solve that problem?
I don't think you always can, but I think I know it's there because you listen in the car, you listen on headphones, you listen on shitty speakers, you listen on really nice speakers, and you're just like, I guess I'm listening, at the end of the day, I'm just, how do I like listening to it? You can only chisel so much, right? But yeah, as far as listening to your own record, I mean, at some point you're not really immersed anymore, right? You're just in the fine-tuning zone.
Yeah, where some of the changes you make are probably things that nobody's going to notice consciously, though. I always tell myself that, like, but what if I could just get, how do you know when you're done?
Oh, God, that question. I mean,
you don't have to answer it.
I think the type of workers we are, I just feel like we would work and work and work and work on it and, and build and build and build and build it. And I have to be given a deadline, and I also have to tell myself that I have more things I want to do.
Yeah.
But I know when a song is done being written, I think I'm still learning in the studio when, I think if you're like, I have 2 weeks worth of studio time, and then, if I really have to fight for something, I will. But I usually just try to make it done.
It is nice to have that end point where you go like, well, we're going to have something by the end of this.
Especially with this last deadline because of COVID and everything backed up, I knew that if I wanted to have my record out at a certain time, if I lost my place in line, it wasn't like I got pushed back one. I would get pushed to the back of the line, which would have meant my album couldn't have come out this year.
Right. That's another thing. I gave up completely on the idea of touring in a conventional way on this record because I knew that even if everything started to open up again, the line for the venues for touring was just going to be so long that there was no way I could get to it.
No, it's been pretty intense. I don't even know if I told you, but after, that bus that we had, that was falling apart and the driver was falling asleep while driving while we were all trying to sleep.
This is the bus you're using in Europe that I saw you and you were a few days into the tour.
Yes, and we didn't make it after Paris. We had to let the bus go because the toilet was leaking. The window was, he taped the window. The side of the bus was totally scratched from, hitting cars, going up against walls, rumble strips, God knows what. And this was, the last available bus a year ago. So we had reserved the bus a year ago, and it was the only company that had it.
Yeah.
And we ended up feeling so unsafe from the conditions that we left the bus in Paris and trained it the rest of the tour.
Wait, you went by train for the rest of your tour? You were going to the UK?
There wasn't any other option.
Yeah.
And, there were other people that had their tour canceled and rescheduled or pushed or whatever. And I know it's happening to so many people with, there's not enough help and also there's nothing available. So it's just, even our merch was all messed up overseas because of Brexit and shipping and customs. We were chasing a little bit of the merch and we couldn't send that much out because of it either. And we weren't making any money on it, but we wanted to have it available to fans,
Yeah.
So it's all sticky and tricky.
Did you ever think that you would be in charge of this many logistical things?
Never. I mean, it's so much, and, that unit just on the European tour is 10 to 12 people, depending on the day. Musicians, crew, drivers. So generally it's 10 to 12 people riding on a bus together. And that's just on tour, let alone, label, booking agents, publicists, like publishers, like all that.
It's a small army of people that, you're sort of at the top of the structure, and you're also sort of not in certain ways too.
You're hiring people that know how to do it better than you. And also just the attention that you're able to give it if you're really going to be a musician full time. I work with people that are my friends and I consider them family. And I've worked with a lot of people for a long time now.
You're also sort of an employer though, right? Like you're kind of responsible for these people's livelihood. That's got to feel heavy.
Yeah, especially during COVID,
What did you do?
Well, I kept telling my agent, like, sure, I'll do that tour if COVID isn't a thing.
Thinking that that'll never happen.
But, in 2020, it was just, we had tours get canceled and then, they tried to push it toward the end of the year. And, I remember having conversations with my manager and he, who's also my partner, Zeke. And I'd be like, well, how do we know that this is okay? He's like, well, we just have to say yes until we don't feel safe about it. And we're just going to follow the guidelines and only do things in our comfort level. And as we learned what was safe and unsafe, we'd say, okay, I'll say yes until it's unsafe. And, we just keep crossing our fingers for each other and working as much as we can. For my bandmates, I would try to take on projects and involve them on it from afar if I was asked to do something.
Yeah.
And just make sure that they felt in the loop. We helped them get loans and, got in touch with the right people for them to help get any support that they needed. But yeah.
So I've just seen you go from being someone I saw selling T-shirts at a merch booth to basically an employment agency.
It's, the music industry can be a well-oiled machine, but, Zeke and I just had this conversation yesterday because we're like, as much as we want to act like we're professionals and everything, it's at the end of the day, it's fucking rock and roll. And we love making music, we love playing, and we have an awesome group of people around supporting us. And everyone that's doing it, you've got to be passionate about it because there's going to be things that we forget about. It's not going to be perfect. We're going to make mistakes and we're all just trying to make art and be a tight-knit group. You create a family and then you kind of spin out into the world,
Tour has that funny quality where the people you're with seem like the only other three-dimensional beings in the universe because everyone else just flies away from you. You see somebody and you're not going to see them tomorrow. They're just gone.
It's pretty wild. On that note, do you miss touring?
There's things I miss. I miss playing. I miss playing for sure. A lot. And I'm trying to figure out how to sort of get back into that in some ways. I'm trying to start with this one big show in Austin next year in May. That would be both Shearwater and Loma. And then it's then we'll both be rehearsed, enough to where if we can work out some other opportunities after that, then we'll be able to do it.
You told me a little bit about the show when I saw you in Hamburg, but can you talk about it now? Where are you at?
I can talk about it. I don't know if it'll happen. It's so far nobody has said no. So I keep just proceeding as if it's actually going to happen and hoping that all the finances work out for it eventually. I think they will. But I think it's usually a little like what you're saying about COVID. You just sort of say yes to stuff and act like it's, you're doing. And it's amazing how far it can get you, I think, because eventually other people go, oh, okay, I guess that's happening. And then it's at the end, it seems like it was inevitable. It's also fun just to have especially these days, to have just some kind of goal out there in the future that you're trying to meet, that you set for yourself.
We are a community still, right?
Yeah, it's nice to at least to create one in that space. But gosh, this is also far removed from, just writing songs and playing. You never thought you'd have to make something this big in order to be able to do that.
Now you're an event planner.
Suddenly you're an event planner.
So there's 2 records coming, right? So
which ones?
Well, you have a Shearwater record.
Yeah, that one just came out.
And then there's a Loma one, right?
Yeah, there's a new Loma record, Loma 3, which is a big mess right now.
And can I say that? I never
yeah.
know anymore.
I don't see any point in keeping this stuff secret. I mean, if I were Beyonce or something, then maybe that'd be a problem. I'm working on this book too, and people occasionally get kind of cagey about like the subject of their book, as if someone's going to steal your subject or something. But I feel like it's better for me to just talk about the fact that I'm doing it.
2 albums and a second book. Jeez,
second book.
Jonathan.
Well, a body can't just sit around. It's fun to do these different things, though. Part of it involves like weird sea life in Antarctica. And this is a world I knew absolutely zero about. And it is so weird. Like I'm looking at, I have this book called Antarctic Macrobenthos, which I've been reading a lot lately. And it's, I'm holding it up to the camera, which you won't be able to see. But these are just a few of the examples of the strange species that live in Antarctica. There's a bunch of sea spiders right here, which are related to actual spiders. Some of them are like the size of Frisbees, and they're just so freaking bizarre. And all of these creatures it just looks like a field guide to alien life. Like here's some isopods here. This is terrible podcast etiquette right here.
Are they currently existing or are they prehistoric?
No, these are alive now. It's amazing because some of these things are recognizable in fossils that are 400 million years old. There are these things called feather stars. They're related to starfish a little bit, but they look like ferns. But if you imagine like an ornamental fern that if you surprised it, like jumped up and flew away. It's sort of like
that is so crazy.
It's so much fun to spend time thinking about this vast world about which I know the tiniest bit. And it has nothing to do with music at all. But somehow like stretching out into that world and thinking about other parts of life that aren't human beings. I think it really feeds the music in ways that I can't describe exactly.
It helps things not feel finite, right? Because
yeah, precisely. Yeah,
it's just like another universe.
I mean, what do you do that's not music?
I love cooking. I love trying difficult recipes, even when they don't come out perfect, because I find it very zen, to mix flavors together that you wouldn't even necessarily know would go well together, and also turning people onto food they didn't know that they would like even. Getting my 5-year-old into sushi was really, really fun. How
did you do that?
He just thought it looked really cool because he started getting into fish. And so we'd start pushing the limits a little bit. And he's eaten oysters. He likes smoked salmon. And so as we saw that he was starting to get into just the fish part, then we thought, okay, well, then maybe the little rolls will be fun. But then between the chopsticks and the dipping and now he's venturing out into other flavors. He's not into spicy yet, but he does like to venture out, which is fun to see. I was one of 5 kids, so my parents couldn't be very adventurous. And when you have a couple picky eaters, you just kind of go with what's the easiest thing for everybody. But, I think that helped me later in life venture out. But I always liked it. I love the kitchen. I love what it represents, and just the communal kind of social, also learning how to let go and share and divvy up, the tasks when it comes to cooking. I think you can tell a lot about a person by how they cook with other people.
It's not that different from a band in a lot of ways.
Exactly. You have to learn how to delegate, or you have to be able to take an order or ask questions if you don't know what you're talking about. I still want to I won't go on a tangent about cooking, but it's one of the things I like to do when I'm not making music.
Yeah. I was about to ask you one more cooking question. What's an experiment that's worked out well for you?
I wanted to have a tapas style party for New Year's, and I did paella for the first time, which is actually very complicated. You got to get the arborio rice. You have to get the special pan because there's something in the pan and how it conducts heat that it cooks it perfectly, and you have to kind of have it at a lower heat for a very long time so that it doesn't burn, but you still have to allow the crust to form. And and saffron is such it's a subtle, if you use too much, you ruin the dish because it's very strong for just a pinch. I was able to timing wise get the paella out right after I had done a bunch of little finger foods, which I'm just not good at timing, and I'm not the best social butterfly in hosting in a little party or whatever. Mm-hmm. But just I was proud of my paella for only having done it once.
And so this is so much like putting on a show. All these things have to happen in its exact schedule, and like all these people have to work together, and it's all good.
No, it makes you admire hosts more that like they can, when they have the food and they time it right, where like it's warm by the time you get it, and they can still. I go to parties and I can remember people. I went to parties, and I just remember. You're like, what are you doing?
We're now in the mythical distant past.
Oh my God, I know. But, you know, when you can see them floating around the room, but like have an internal clock to know when they need to check on things. And like, I don't have that, you know, I'm like glued to the kitchen and I still can't get timing quite right. But, you know, it's like Amelia Bedelia in the kitchen. You know?
Amelia Bedelia's paella would be something else though.
Thanks for getting the reference. I know it's an old one.
Oh yeah, no, Amelia Bedelia, for those of you who don't know, was a character in children's books who would take everything literally, right? That was her thing.
Yes.
Like I remember being asked to make a sponge cake, and she like cut up a sponge and made a cake out of it.
Oh yeah, and she went to prune the bushes, and she put actual prunes on them.
Yeah, she's
very silly, like, and always like has the biggest heart, but like can't ever quite get things right.
You're kind of rooting for her, but you know what she's gonna do, and the fun of it is for kids is anticipating like the moment she gets an instruction, you think, oh, I know what she's gonna do. She's gonna put prunes on all the bushes and cut up a sponge.
My son cracked up when I read it to him. I still love it.
What makes him laugh?
He loves like accidents, you know, like
people falling down.
Like he was watching Cool Runnings.
Uh-huh.
And like, you know, about the Jamaican bobsled team?
Oh yeah.
And they're practicing and they like crash into something and they all fall out and like the whole partition falls down. And you know, he had it on with headphones, like we were on a road trip and he had his headphones on. I just heard him laughing hysterically, and he laughs in this certain way. Like, are you watching Cool Runnings again? He's like, yeah. But, you know, he likes, you know, he loved The Sandlot. He loved the scene where the kid plays a trick on the lifeguard where he pretends to drown and she takes him out of the pool and then he kisses her. It's a different kind of laugh where it's like wrong. You know, but
like, oh, that shouldn't have happened.
You know.
Do you remember like being a kid and what it felt like when something was so funny that you just couldn't believe it?
My dad took me to see Home Alone in the theater, and I'm sure that I laughed before that. the history of laughing, but it was so contagious, and I just felt like. Because first, it's like how you're experiencing it, but then also it's like how you're sharing it and the people around you that you're experiencing it with. And then that becomes part of it too, you know?
First book I did was a nonfiction story about these weird birds of prey from South America. That's really like about everything in the universe, but that's sort of the keyhole it's looking through. And this next one is about Antarctica and its past and future. You know, you have all you can't change the facts, but you can move them all around however you want to.
Right.
Just like you can when you're arranging a song and you're like, okay, this has to flow this way and this is going to go into this section this way and we're going to make this transition happen here. And the overall arc of the thing, the arc of the record, the arc of the song, it's all the same process. And is it lumpy in here? Why am I getting bored in this part? You know, like I like this song up until about 1:35 and then all of a sudden somehow I lose interest in it. Why is that? What's happening?
I don't know. I feel like a book would have to be something entirely different. I wouldn't even know where to begin.
You just put one word in front of the other. It's torture. It's horrible. I don't recommend it. It doesn't have any of the immediacy of the joy of making music with other people. You know, like you're never surprised by something because it's all just Malkovich. It's just like your head.
I know, it must be a wild thing to share after making records. What were your takeaways from writing that book that will inform how you write this next one?
My editor gave me really good advice, which annoyed me a lot because he was almost always right, even though I resisted his instructions every time. Because, you know, you turn the thing in, like you've slaved and like tried to make this thing that works for you. And you hand it to your editor and he goes, you know, I really think that one chapter is too long. You're like, no, that's the best one. But,
no notes.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, that's great. he encouraged me to write through the transitions, because especially in the writing something like that, this big nonfiction narrative that puts all these different things that seem like they don't belong together. I was just writing little sections and then having a little dash and then having another section and a little dash and having another section. And he said, you start, you stop, you start, you stop, just write through these transitions. That was super, super helpful. You know, when you're on stage and you feel like you're about to lose the audience, and you just desperately don't want to lose them, and you you lean in even harder to try to keep from losing them.
Absolutely.
Every sentence feels like that a lot of the time. I always assume that whoever is reading is about to throw the book down in disgust. And so I'm like, how can I entertain you and keep you going into the next thing here? What creature can I offer up for you? What landscape can I paint for you? Like, how can I, or a human character that you can sort of hang out with so that it's not just talking about a bunch of weird animals you've never seen. You asked me what I learned. I just learned that I wasn't going to get it right the first time, no matter what. Which I think, you always dream of just being able to come right out of the gate and be like, ta-da, it's brilliant. But it just doesn't happen. And I'm terrible about waiting till the last minute to do things because I'm terrified. But with the book, you just couldn't do it. You can't write a book in a night. It's not possible. So I just had to pace myself and just keep nosing into it, even when I didn't want to do it anymore. Mainly, I guess the thing I learned was that it did, in fact, eventually end, which gives me a lot of hope that this one will too. At least it's possible.
Was it harder to start or end the writing process?
Harder to start, definitely, because you're trying to figure out where to drop it in. And I wrote the beginning 3 or 4 times in completely different places. It started with different episodes, different places in time, before I finally found the one that let me get into the thing that way. The thing is, a book is so linear. I mean, with music, you can serve up just a sound that gives you a feeling. And that's enough for you in the moment. But because all you have are some words, it's relentlessly linear. Like, stuff has to flow. Every sentence has to connect to the one after it. Now I'm starting to talk myself out of writing this next one. But Sharon, you've got how much more do you have to go now in this album cycle? Are you already looking towards the next one, or can you even imagine?
We're about to do a big 5-week tour. I leave in like a week or so. But I am looking ahead. When we were doing just pre-production for the tour, like after the record was made and we were figuring out how we were going to do these songs live, I got to go into a studio space in Joshua Tree to hash out just just playing with our band and like feeling what that would be like again, because we hadn't all been in the same room yet. And we had a little extra time at the end of the week after rehearsing to just jam. And I've never jammed before. And I've always talked about writing and playing in this way, but we had a few hours to do that at the end of like a really awesome week. Just had breakfast together, we played, had lunch together, we played, had dinner together and watched a show and went to bed.
Oh, it sounds like heaven.
It was so nice. And we wrote like a couple songs while we were there. And I let go in a very different way. And the music isn't necessarily what I would have done myself, but like as this new entity, it's something that I think I want to explore.
Yeah.
And so I think that's my next mode, is just starting with a blank slate in a space together and seeing what happens.
Isn't it exciting to not know what's going to happen?
Sometimes.
in that sense.
In that sense, yeah. Because everyone's like, well, what's your next thing? I'm just like, I don't really know, but like, I don't like doing the same thing over and over again.
No, exactly. And after a while, you kind of run through the list of your habits. Actually, this reminds me, this is sort of, I think, the last question I should ask you, but it's this time when I just saw you, it had probably been a long time since I'd seen you perform. I think it was 2012 or something, last time I saw you. And you were so different on stage now. Like you play guitar some, but not as much. And a lot more of the time, you're just there with the microphone. And you have this really sort of easy but forceful presence that's I don't know quite how to describe it. It's like the superhero version of you. Like, it was you. Like, I recognize, like, no, that's totally Sharon. It didn't seem like some put on thing where you're trying to be some character that you aren't. But it was a very honest expression of a certain version of you. And how did you learn to access that?
Honestly, it started when I was making Remind Me Tomorrow with John Congleton. Because I feel like He saw something in my music that I don't think I had seen before. You're the one that I talked to about John Congleton before I knew I was going to work with him. And said, when you're ready to work with like a producer that will take your songs to another place, then he's your person, you know. And I was ready at that point just because I had been re-recording my demos over and over again, and they weren't getting better. And I realized this because I wasn't letting go. And we went into the studio, and he picked all of the musicians, and he hired the perfect studio band. And I got to just go in there as a singer. And I had never done that before. And so now I'm playing with all these amazing musicians, and it just kind of heightened my awareness of, people know I know how to play, right? I mean, I think at this point, you know, I don't have this insecurity where people will be like, oh, she doesn't write her own songs. She doesn't know how to play these instruments. But actually, when I'm able to just sing most of the time, I can actually be a better performer by not playing. I mean, sometimes I need to play the guitar to feel a certain song, but as I'm learning to let go and just sing and focus on singing, it just makes the song and the performance in the live setting feel much different. I can interact with the audience more than if I were playing and it's only just circular with the band. But also the music and the tones and the sonic palette that he helped me create on that record gave me the confidence to even reach for this alter ego that I knew that I had. And it's not an alter ego, as Zeke would say, it's elevated Sharon. Yeah. If I go to karaoke night and sing my favorite song, I mean, like, that's what I want it to be. It's like Sharon karaoke, and just, I don't know, it's nice to let go. And nice to just not be that quiet, sensitive kid. Like, I'm still a sensitive kid, but I can own it a little bit more now.
That's great.
I can't believe that we've known each other so long.
I know. Yeah. We've grown old, Sharon. We've grown old.
Well, I love you so much.
I love you too. It's great to see you.
And you've always had faith in me, and that's always meant the world. And I'm just so proud of you for everything you're doing.
Likewise, lady.
Thanks for listening to the Talkhouse Podcast, and thanks to Sharon Van Etten and Jonathan Meiburg for chatting. If you liked what you heard, please do follow Talkhouse on your favorite podcasting platform and at talkhouse.com, where you'll find a bunch of Meiburg's essays, too. This episode was produced by Myron Kaplan, and the Talkhouse theme is composed and performed by The Range. See you next time.